I can't generate an image right now, but could you describe the scene in more detail? For example, the surroundings, the girl's emotions, or the dominant colors in the picture. This will help me prepare a better description when I can create images again. The trial of Ana Trujillo. With all the evidence against her, investigators officially charged Ana Trujillo with murder. On March 31, 2014, she walked into a packed courtroom in Houston's Harris County Courthouse. The case had become a media sensation. Headlines labeled her as a 45-year-old massage therapist accused of brutally murdering her 59-year-old scientist boyfriend. The public was captivated by the shocking details. During the trial, both sides fought fiercely to prove their case. The defense argued that Ana acted in self-defense, that Stefan had attacked her, and she did what she had to do to survive. The prosecution, however, completely disagreed. They painted Ana as a violent and aggressive woman who had mercilessly beaten her partner to death. In the courtroom, prosecutors made their final plea. Ana Trujillo savagely murdered her lover. Nothing stopped her from doing it. Nothing will stop her from doing it again. She deserves a life sentence. Put her away forever. Then came the moment of truth. Ana waited anxiously as the jury deliberated. Finally, the verdict was announced. Guilty. The verdict: a life sentence. Ana Trujillo was found guilty of murder. The jury rejected her self-defense claim, concluding that she had intentionally killed Stefan Anderson. But the most shocking moment came after the verdict. Instead of breaking down or showing remorse, Ana stood up defiantly and declared, "I do not regret what I did." She showed no fear, no remorse, no concern, only cold defiance. The judge and jury had seen enough. Ana Trujillo was sentenced to life in prison for the trial of Ana Trujillo. With all the evidence against her, investigators officially charged Ana Trujillo with murder. On March 31, 2014, she walked into a packed courtroom in Houston's Harris County Courthouse. The case had become a media sensation. Headlines labeled her as a 45-year-old massage therapist accused of brutally murdering her 59-year-old scientist boyfriend. The public was captivated by the shocking details. During the trial, both sides fought fiercely to prove their case. The defense argued that Ana acted in self-defense, that Stefan had attacked her, and she did what she had to do to survive. The prosecution, however, completely disagreed. They painted Ana as a violent and aggressive woman who had mercilessly beaten her partner to death. In the courtroom, prosecutors made their final plea. Ana Trujillo savagely murdered her lover. Nothing stopped her from doing it. Nothing will stop her from doing it again. She deserves a life sentence. Put her away forever. Then came the moment of truth. Ana waited anxiously as the jury deliberated. Finally, the verdict was announced. Guilty. The verdict: a life sentence. Ana Trujillo was found guilty of murder. The jury rejected her self-defense claim, concluding that she had intentionally killed Stefan Anderson. But the most shocking moment came after the verdict. Instead of breaking down or showing remorse, Ana stood up defiantly and declared, "I do not regret what I did." She showed no fear, no remorse, no concern, only cold defiance. The judge and jury had seen enough. Ana Trujillo was sentenced to life in prison for the brutal murder of Stefan Anderson. Her weapon of choice? A 5.5-inch high heeled shoe, a murder so shocking that it left an entire city in disbelief. Bananoy, type tok chat GPT tuanoy. That was the final part of the story. Ana Trujillo was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Stefan Anderson. After the trial, the case continued to attract public attention due to its bizarre nature, a high-heeled shoe used as a deadly weapon. Many people debated whether Ana had truly acted in self-defense or if she was a cold-blooded killer. Despite her conviction, the trial of Ana Trujillo. With all the evidence against her, investigators officially charged Ana Trujillo with murder. On March 31, 2014, she walked into a packed courtroom in Houston's Harris County Courthouse. The case had become a media sensation. Headlines labeled her as a 45-year-old massage therapist accused of brutally murdering her 59-year-old scientist boyfriend. The public was captivated by the shocking details. During the trial, both sides fought fiercely to prove their case. The defense argued that Anna acted in self-defense, that Stefan had attacked her, and she did what she had to do to survive. The prosecution, however, completely disagreed. They painted Anna as a violent and aggressive woman who had mercilessly beaten her partner to death. In the courtroom, prosecutors made their final plea. Anna Truhillo savagely murdered her lover. Nothing stopped her from doing it. Nothing will stop her from doing it again. She deserves a life sentence. Put her away forever. Then came the moment of truth. Anna waited anxiously as the jury deliberated. Finally, the verdict was announced. Guilty. The verdict: a life sentence. Anna Truhillo was found guilty of murder. The jury rejected her self-defense claim, concluding that she had intentionally killed Stefan Anderson. But the most shocking moment came after the verdict. Instead of breaking down or showing remorse, Anna stood up defiantly and declared, "I do not regret what I did." She showed no fear, no remorse, no concern, only cold defiance. The judge and jury had seen enough. Anna Truhillo was sentenced to life in prison for the brutal murder of Stefan Anderson. Her weapon of choice? A 5.5-inch high heeled shoe, a murder so shocking that it left an entire city in disbelief. Bananoy, type tok chat GPT tuanoy. That was the final part of the story. Anna Truhillo was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Stefan Anderson. After the trial, the case continued to attract public attention due to its bizarre nature, a high-heeled shoe used as a deadly weapon. Many people debated whether Anna had truly acted in self-defense or if she was a cold-blooded killer. Despite the trial of Anna Truhillo, with all the evidence against her, investigators officially charged Anna Truhillo with murder. On March 31, 2014, she walked into a packed courtroom in Houston's Harris County Courthouse. The case had become a media sensation. Headlines labeled her as a 45-year-old massage therapist accused of brutally murdering her 59-year-old scientist boyfriend. The public was captivated by the shocking details. During the trial, both sides fought fiercely to prove their case. The defense argued that Anna acted in self-defense, that Stefan had attacked her, and she did what she had to do to survive. The prosecution, however, completely disagreed. They painted Anna as a violent and aggressive woman who had mercilessly beaten her partner to death. In the courtroom, prosecutors made their final plea. Anna Truhillo savagely murdered her lover. Nothing stopped her from doing it. Nothing will stop her from doing it again. She deserves a life sentence. Put her away forever. Then came the moment of truth. Anna waited anxiously as the jury deliberated. Finally, the verdict was announced. Guilty. The verdict: a life sentence. Anna Truhillo was found guilty of murder. The jury rejected her self-defense claim, concluding that she had intentionally killed Stefan Anderson. But the most shocking moment came after the verdict. Instead of breaking down or showing remorse, Anna stood up defiantly and declared, "I do not regret what I did." She showed no fear, no remorse, no concern, only cold defiance. The judge and jury had seen enough. Anna Truhillo was sentenced to life in prison for the brutal murder of Stefan Anderson. Her weapon of choice? A 5.5-inch high heeled shoe, a murder so shocking that it left an entire city in disbelief. Bananoy, type tok chat GPT tuanoy. That was the final part of the story. Anna Truhillo was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Stefan Anderson. After the trial, the case continued to attract public attention due to its bizarre nature, a high-heeled shoe used as a deadly weapon. Many people debated whether Anna had truly acted in self-defense or if she was a cold-blooded killer. The trial of Anna Truhillo, with all the evidence against her, investigators officially charged Ana Trujillo with murder. On March 31, 2014, she walked into a packed courtroom in Houston's Harris County Courthouse. The case had become a media sensation. Headlines labeled her as a 45-year-old massage therapist accused of brutally murdering her 59-year-old scientist boyfriend. The public was captivated by the shocking details. During the trial, both sides fought fiercely to prove their case. The defense argued that Ana acted in self-defense, that Stefan had attacked her, and she did what she had to do to survive. The prosecution, however, completely disagreed. They painted Ana as a violent and aggressive woman who had mercilessly beaten her partner to death. In the courtroom, prosecutors made their final plea. Ana Trujillo savagely murdered her lover. Nothing stopped her from doing it. Nothing will stop her from doing it again. She deserves a life sentence. Put her away forever. Then came the moment of truth. Ana waited anxiously as the jury deliberated. Finally, the verdict was announced. Guilty. The verdict: a life sentence. Ana Trujillo was found guilty of murder. The jury rejected her self-defense claim, concluding that she had intentionally killed Stefan Anderson. But the most shocking moment came after the verdict. Instead of breaking down or showing remorse, Ana stood up defiantly and declared, "I do not regret what I did." She showed no fear, no remorse, no concern, only cold defiance. The judge and jury had seen enough. Ana Trujillo was sentenced to life in prison for the brutal murder of Stefan Anderson. Her weapon of choice? A 5.5-inch high heeled shoe, a murder so shocking that it left an entire city in disbelief. Final part of the story: Ana Trujillo was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Stefan Anderson. After the trial, the case continued to attract public attention due to its bizarre nature, a high-heeled shoe used as a deadly weapon. Many people debated whether Ana had truly acted in self-defense or if she was a cold-blooded killer. Leticia Jandro, a bodybuilder with an impressive physique, a successful husband, and then he vanished without a trace. Paul's BMW 5 Series remained parked in the garage, covered in a thin layer of dust, as if it hadn't been used for days. But the growing sense of unease intensified as strange details began to emerge. Why was Christmas wrapping paper taped over the windows in the middle of summer? Why didn't Leticia want to talk about her husband's disappearance? Why was there a strong, persistent odor of decomposition in the house? And who or what was hiding in the closet? The mysteries surrounding Leticia continued to pile up. What was she hiding? And more importantly, where was Paul Jandro, Moyoc, North Carolina, June 30, 2010? It was supposed to be just an ordinary Wednesday morning. But for Safety Inspector Dennis Carter, that day was anything but normal. For the first time in nearly 2 years, his colleague Paul Jandro did not show up for work. Paul was always punctual. He had never missed a day. But that morning, his phone went unanswered, and his messages were ignored. A sense of unease grew among Carter and his co-workers. They decided to report the matter to the authorities. The next morning, a deputy sheriff was dispatched to Jandro's home for a welfare check. Upon arrival, she found Paul's truck parked outside, but there was no sign of him. She knocked on the door, called his name, but the house remained eerily silent. Concern deepened when Paul's colleagues suggested calling his wife, Leticia Jandro, an employee at a defense contracting firm. However, when the police contacted Leticia at Blackwater, she simply stated that she hadn't seen her husband that day and had no idea where he was. Things took an even stranger turn when, shortly after that phone call, Leticia, the 37-year-old wife, also vanished without a trace. A husband and wife disappearing within the same time frame, no clues, no explanations. Although she was once an outstanding high school athlete, Leticia Jandro never attended college. The former track and field star had gone through 2 failed marriages before meeting Paul Jandro in the summer of 2002. At the time, Paul, 42 years old, was preparing to leave the Navy after more than 20 years of service. He retired with the rank of commander and quickly started a new career at a defense contracting firm in Norfolk. But Paul was not a typical retiree. With his extensive experience, he adapted easily to his new life. The first time he met Letitia, he was immediately drawn to her. At 29, she had a toned, muscular physique and an energetic presence. In fact, Letitia was even stronger than Paul. They quickly became workout partners, and within weeks, their relationship evolved beyond just training together. Less than a year later, on June 28, 2003, Letitia and Paul officially married, marking the beginning of a new chapter in both their lives. Letitia always exuded toughness, while Paul was friendly and approachable. When meeting Letitia for the first time, she barely interacted with anyone, reserved, distant. In contrast, Paul was cheerful and easygoing. Despite their contrasting personalities, they stayed together. Paul had a stable income at Bay, and Letitia also transitioned into the defense industry, joining a private training facility operated by Blackwater USA, one of the largest military contractors in the country. Their life seemed to be going smoothly, stable careers, a promising future. But then, tragedy struck, one that would test their marriage in ways no one could have foreseen. In 2006, after a long struggle with infertility, Paul and Letitia finally received good news. But their happiness was quickly overshadowed by tragedy. In July, Letitia went into premature labor. The twins could not be born healthy. One baby did not survive before birth, and the other lived for only 42 seconds.
The immense pain devastated Letitia.
She fell into deep despair and developed post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, from the loss of her children. To cope with the grief, Letitia threw herself into training, doubling her hours at the gym. She immersed herself in female bodybuilding competitions and won, channeling her pain into a relentless drive to push herself beyond her limits. Paul was proud of his wife's achievements. He kept photos from Letitia's competitions and even built a home gym in their Moyoc house to support her training.
He did everything he could to encourage and motivate her, but instead of bringing them closer, the distance between them grew. Paul's friends began to notice something. He was no longer Letitia's husband. He was becoming her trainer. By 2008, 2 years after the tragic loss of their twins, Letitia had become so independent that she was emotionally distant from her own husband. They rarely spent time together, like two ships silently passing in the night. Paul slept in an upstairs bedroom while Letitia spent her nights downstairs.
They lived under the same roof, but in reality, they were completely separated. She had her own life.
So did he. Paul grew increasingly frustrated with the arrangement. After nearly 8 years together, he had endured enough. Perhaps he wanted to leave.
Perhaps he was ready to move on. But the question was, would he ever get the chance? Because just days later, Paul vanished, and Letitia began acting strangely. There was Christmas wrapping paper taped over the windows despite it being July.
She refused to talk about her husband's disappearance, and a putrid smell of decomposition began creeping through the house.
Even so, she agreed to take time off work and return home to meet with the police. When Letitia arrived at the house, she and the female deputy entered together. The house was a mess. There was no sign of Paul. From the moment his disappearance was reported, Paul's colleagues and neighbors felt that something was wrong.
2 of his co-workers decided to drive to his house to check on him. As they pulled into the driveway, a bizarre sight unfolded before them. All the windows were covered with Christmas wrapping paper in the middle of summer. Inside, they found Letitia standing in the dark. The lights were off. Every window was sealed shut.
But the strangeness didn't end there. Letitia was wearing a cloak, pulled up to cover most of her face.
Dennis, one of Paul's co-workers, stared at her and asked bluntly, "Have you seen Paul?"
"Yes," Letitia replied, but Dennis didn't believe her. He met her gaze, his eyes sharp.
"I don't believe you."
The accusation made Letitia furious. The atmosphere became unbearably tense. The Christmas wrapping paper on the windows, Letitia's reaction.
The vague accusations about Paul.
Everything felt terribly, horribly wrong. Dennis and his colleague quickly left the Jandro home. And as soon as they stepped outside, the door slammed shut behind them. However, Dennis didn't go straight home. His instincts told him something wasn't right.
So he spent time talking to Paul's neighbors, hoping to uncover some clue.
The next day, on July Honest, Paul's co-worker, Kyle Cheatwood, along with another employee from Bay Systems, decided to drive down to his house for another check. When they arrived, Paul's truck was still parked out front, but what caught their attention was the person unloading items from the truck. It wasn't Paul. It was Letitia. What was she doing with her husband's truck? And why did her every action radiate an air of secrecy?
Kyle immediately contacted the authorities. When the police arrived, Letitia seemed irritated. She claimed she was just cleaning up. When asked about the furniture, she gave a curt response, "There's nothing."
She even allowed the detectives to check the trunk of her car, as if she wanted to prove she wasn't hiding anything. But soon after, her demeanor shifted, agitated, snappy, snapping at anyone who mentioned Paul. Once again, authorities found no trace of Paul, no evidence of a struggle, nothing suspicious. But there was one thing they knew for sure: Paul hadn't simply run off with another woman. The investigation team decided to call Paul's cell phone, hoping it would lead them closer to the truth. And then a crucial signal appeared. Paul's phone was still on, and it was pinging off cell towers in Elizabeth City.
The search for Paul Jandro grew more intense. As soon as investigators detected a trace of his presence, they immediately drove to Elizabeth City,
scouring every hotel in hopes of finding a lead. Had Paul simply grown tired of his marriage and left for a few days? Or was something far more sinister at play?
Armed with a copy of Paul's driver's license photo, they approached hotel staff one by one,
asking if anyone had seen him. Some employees vaguely recalled seeing a white man in his 50s who resembled Paul. When they arrived at the Hampton Inn, they found key witnesses. Several staff members confirmed they had seen Paul the previous night. They were so close to the missing man, or at least they thought they were. Paul's co-workers continued to call his phone, but there was no answer. Then, more than 24 hours after he had vanished, the phone was finally picked up. But it wasn't Paul on the other end. Instead, the voice of a construction worker came through. He said he had found the phone in perfect condition, undamaged, almost as if someone had deliberately placed it there. That same day, Letitia unexpectedly reached out to investigators. But she wasn't calling to ask about her husband. She had only one question: did the police come to my house today? Authorities arranged to meet with Letitia later that day. But when they arrived at the scheduled time, she was gone. On the door of her house, they found only a small note that read, "I went out for a walk." They searched everywhere, but Letitia was nowhere to be found. Less than 72 hours after Paul Jandro disappeared, his wife, Letitia, had vanished as well. Police immediately launched a large-scale search operation. It had been 3 days since Paul, 50, had failed to appear for work in Norfolk. And now, Letitia Jandro, 37, was gone from their home in Mocksville. But then, suddenly, on July 2, 2010, Letitia called 911. Her voice was calm, not panicked. She refused to disclose her location. But the strangest part? Tracking data showed that the call had been made from inside her own house. Immediately, police surrounded the home, preparing for a forced entry. Once they secured a search warrant, they moved in under the cover of night. As they entered the garage, something immediately caught their attention. A massive pile of trash sat in the middle of the space. They pushed further inside, guns drawn. The air was thick with an eerie silence. And then, finally, they found her. Letitia was lying motionless on the floor of a bedroom closet. For a moment, they thought she was dead. But no, she was still alive. Letitia was taken into custody as authorities began their long-awaited search of the house she had so desperately tried to keep them out of. During questioning, Letitia claimed she believed
Someone had tried to break into her home.
She also denied knowing where Paul was. One of the officers suddenly entered the interrogation room. He didn't say a word. He simply leaned down and whispered into his colleague's ear.
In the garage, hidden beneath the foul-smelling pile of trash they had discovered earlier, investigators had just pulled out a 50-gallon plastic bin. The moment they opened it, an unbearable stench filled the air, the smell of decomposition. Inside, something was tightly wrapped in multiple layers of plastic and fabric. As the flashlight beam shone through, a lock of human hair peeked out from between the layers. It was a body. The investigators immediately contacted the medical examiner and the North Carolina Bureau of Investigation to confirm the victim's identity. Meanwhile, they returned to the interrogation room, where Leticia was still pretending to know nothing.
The interrogator said, "I'm giving you one last chance to tell the truth, because we already know where Paul is."
Her story began to change. At first, she continued to deny killing Paul. But then, she offered a new explanation. She claimed she knew who had done it. According to Leticia, it was drug dealers' men she had supposedly hired to teach Paul a lesson because she was angry with him. But why would a random group of drug dealers target Paul? Was Leticia telling the truth, or was this just another lie? As Leticia sat in the interrogation room, scrambling to come up with a convincing story, investigators continued searching her home. And then they found undeniable evidence. In a corner of the floor, something felt off. A section of carpet had been glued down with industrial adhesive. When they peeled it back, the sight underneath sent chills down everyone's spine. Blood everywhere.
But that wasn't all.
On the wooden floor beneath the carpet, they found multiple bullet holes, along with more bullet holes piercing the walls of the bedroom.
Leticia had tried to cover them up using putty to fill each one. Police then inspected Leticia's car. Inside, they discovered a .45 caliber semi-automatic pistol. There was no more room for deception. When the medical examiner analyzed Paul's body, they confirmed that it was riddled with bullet wounds. The evidence was overwhelming. Leticia was immediately charged with murder. She was handcuffed and taken straight to the police station. But just when investigators thought the case was closed, Leticia suddenly made a shocking confession.
A completely unexpected twist was about to unfold.
On July 4, 2010, Leticia Jandro had been in custody for nearly 24 hours. Meanwhile, police were still piecing together the horrifying details of the murder. Paul's body had been discovered inside a 50-gallon plastic container, wrapped in multiple layers of plastic, a desperate attempt to hide the truth.
But the traces of the crime could not be erased. Even though Leticia kept insisting that she had only hired someone to teach Paul a lesson and that they had gone too far, investigators did not believe her story. The
.45 caliber semi-automatic pistol found in Leticia's car was confirmed to be the murder weapon.
When Paul's body was examined, the recovered bullets matched the caliber of the gun.
But then came a shocking revelation. When police contacted Paul's family, they learned that Paul had been planning to file for divorce.
In fact, he had given Leticia a deadline, June 30, to leave the house. And that was the very day he disappeared. Not long after, Leticia was booked into Currituck County Jail on murder charges. But in the end, she was the one who shattered all the lies. She reached out to investigators. She wanted to talk, and her final confession changed everything. "I shot Paul." Leticia claimed that everything started when Paul gave her an ultimatum to leave the house.
"I met with a lawyer, and they told me I didn't have to go."
But when she told Paul this, she claimed that he became more terrifying than ever. "He spent an entire month trying to scare me into leaving. Every morning, the moment I woke up, he would kick the door hard. I was terrified.
And I was prepared to defend myself. Then came June 30, Paul's final deadline for Leticia to leave.
According to Leticia, that morning, Paul stormed into the bedroom. But this time, he wasn't just kicking the door like before. This time, he was holding a rifle.
He pointed it at me and said, "Get the hell out of my house right now," Leticia claimed.
She said Paul gave her 5 minutes to leave before turning his back and walking out.
But instead of running away, Letitia went to get her gun, and then she opened fire. I shot into the room and I hit him once. He staggered back and I shot him again. When he ran toward me, I kept shooting. He tried to grab the gun from me, but I just kept shooting.
The shooting only stopped when Paul collapsed. Afterward, Letitia panicked. She spent 3 days trying to hide his body, deny everything, and even fabricate a story about drug dealers teaching Paul a lesson. But the evidence police found told a different story. In September 2012, the trial of Letitia Jandro officially began. The prosecution completely rejected her claims of self-defense. Paul's death was not self-defense. We believe Letitia ambushed him.
She did not want a divorce, and so she killed Paul out of her need for control. Letitia's defense collapsed under the weight of undeniable evidence. Bullet holes in the floor and bedroom walls proof that she fired repeatedly without hesitation. The
.45 caliber handgun found in her car, which matched the bullets recovered from Paul's body.
Her efforts to cover up the crime, cleaning up blood,
wrapping the body in plastic, and lying to the police.
The prosecutor emphasized Paul never had a chance to fight back. This was not self-defense. This was a deliberate murder. On September 28, 2012, the North Carolina courtroom was packed.
Paul Jandro's family, friends, and colleagues were all there, holding their breath as they waited for the verdict.
After months of legal battles, Letitia Jandro's fate now rested in the hands of the jury. Authorities believed they had an airtight case. Backed by overwhelming evidence, Paul's body was found inside Letitia's home,
wrapped in multiple layers of plastic and stuffed inside a 50-gallon tote.
The bullet holes in the floor and walls suggested a premeditated murder. The .45 caliber gun recovered from Letitia's car matched the bullets in Paul's body. Letitia's shifting stories, first denying everything, then finally admitting she had shot her husband. The prosecution firmly rejected Letitia's self-defense claim, stating this was not self-defense. This was a cold, calculated murder. The jury took only 1 hour and 40 minutes to reach a verdict.
What does that number say? A trial that lasted for months, yet the jury needed less than 2 hours to come to a unanimous decision.
There was no doubt in their minds. And then the verdict was announced. Letitia Jandro, guilty of first-degree murder. The judge wasted no time in delivering the sentence. Life in prison, without the possibility of parole.
Under the blazing fire in the dead of night, Melissa and Gary Cole's home was reduced to ashes.
As firefighters rushed to the scene, they weren't just battling fierce flames, they were facing a chilling mystery. Was this a tragic accident or a crime concealed beneath the fire's fury?
For 11 years, Gary had promised Melissa a better life, a refuge from the wounds of her past. But was their marriage truly a safe harbor, or were there cracks beneath the surface,
waiting to shatter?
As the embers cooled, only one question remained. What really ignited the destruction, a faulty heater or a deadly secret? Under the silent night sky of McNairy County, Tennessee, on November 3, 2009, a 911 call pierced the calm at 1:00 a.m.,
shattering the peace of the neighborhood.
A panicked neighbor reported a fire at the home of Gary and Melissa Cole. "We woke up to the smell of smoke," the caller said.
"My husband stepped out onto the back porch
and saw their house engulfed in flames. Firefighters raced to the scene, red lights flashing against the billowing smoke. Onlookers held their breath, fearing for the lives of Melissa, Gary, and their 9-year-old son.
If they were still inside, their chances of survival were grim.
When the flames finally died down, all that remained of the house was a charred ruin. As firefighters sifted through the smoldering wreckage, they made a grim discovery, a burned body on what was left of the living room couch. It was a man. But if that was Gary Cole, where was Melissa?
And had their 9-year-old son vanished with the fire? Melissa Broadwater, known as Missy to her family, grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee, with a childhood marred by trauma.
From an early age, she endured abuse at the hands of her father. After her parents' divorce, she and her mother moved to Nashville, seeking a fresh start.
But that hope was short-lived when her mother, Kay, remarried a man just as cruel. That marriage also ended in violence, leaving Melissa with deep emotional scars.
These wounds shaped her into a rebellious teenager. At 17, she met James Bear, a 24-year-old electrician.
Despite her mother's disapproval, she ran away with James and married him in 1987.
When she became pregnant with their first child, Melissa felt happier than ever. Their daughter was born in 1988, followed by a son 3 years later.
For over a decade, Melissa devoted herself to being a full-time mother.
By 1998, she decided to return to work and took a part-time job at the electrical company where James worked. But working together didn't bring them closer. James was nearing 40 while Melissa had just turned 30. They drifted apart, their love fading. Melissa felt neglected, isolated in her own marriage. Then a co-worker took notice of her, Gary Cole. Unlike James, Gary was carefree, funny, and had a way of making Melissa feel special.
What started as harmless jokes soon spiraled into a full-blown affair. Things became even more complicated when Melissa discovered she was pregnant with Gary's child. And this was only the beginning of a tragedy no one could have predicted. What shocked everyone the most wasn't Melissa's affair, it was the decision she made afterward. Instead of leaving Gary to return to her family, she chose to walk away from everything. Melissa's family was stunned when they learned that the once devoted mother had abandoned her 2 children, an 8-year-old boy and an 11-year-old girl, to pursue a new life with another man. Shortly after giving birth to Gary's child in 1999, Melissa cut off all contact with everyone, including James and her children. She and Gary moved to rural McNairy County, starting a new chapter. But just months after their son was born, in the spring of 2000, Gary began to change. His family noticed the difference. He was no longer the carefree, light-hearted man he used to be. As he reached his 40s, he struggled with the physically demanding nature of construction work.
Financial pressure weighed heavily on the couple, and the marriage they had once dreamed of was no longer a fairy tale. After years of silence, Melissa unexpectedly reached out to her family. When she returned to Nashville with her youngest son, she was a completely different person. Her mother was shocked by the change. Missy, once bold and impulsive, was now timid and guarded,
as if she were constantly afraid of something.
Her eyes were empty, and whenever someone asked what had happened, she would evade the question with a simple, "I'm fine." No one knew exactly what had changed Melissa. Back at the burned house, as the sheriff's department began searching for her and her son, a terrifying truth started to emerge.
They didn't know if the mother and child had been kidnapped or if they had fled. But as firefighters examined the ashes, they noticed something strange. The kitchen knives hadn't burned in the usual pattern.
Instead of being scorched upward, they had burned downward, an unusual sign that suggested the fire hadn't started naturally. And if the fire wasn't an accident, what had really happened to Melissa Cole? McNairy County, Tennessee, November 3, 2009, around 1:30 a.m.
The blaring red lights of fire trucks sliced through the darkness as firefighters rushed to the scene.
Melissa and Gary Cole's house was engulfed in flames, the inferno raging too fiercely for any hope of survival.
As the fire was finally brought under control, the firefighters began searching through the wreckage.
A small crowd of friends and family gathered outside, anxiously waiting for news.
Then, a devastating discovery, a charred body, seemingly that of an adult male, possibly Gary Cole.
But Melissa and her son were nowhere to be found.
People desperately tried calling Melissa's phone, but there was no answer.
Meanwhile, authorities carefully collected what remained of the body, placing it in a black bag and sending it off for forensic examination. The remains were so badly burned that identification was nearly impossible. But the biggest question now was, Where were Melissa and her son?
Once the body was removed, the scene was turned over to the arson investigation team from the McNairy County Fire Marshal's office. Their job was difficult, dangerous, and time-consuming. A trained arson detection dog was also brought in to assist, but before the investigation could even begin, one of the experts noticed something crucial. With their experienced eye, they spotted an anomaly in the kitchen. The burn patterns didn't rise as they normally would. Instead, the fire had spread downward onto the floor, suggesting that a flammable liquid had been poured before the fire was set. Whether it was kerosene, gasoline, or some other accelerant, one thing was certain: this fire was no accident. The flames had started in the kitchen, but who had set them? And more importantly, where were Melissa and her son? While the arson investigation team continued working at the scene, the family was desperately trying to contact Melissa. Every call went unanswered until a few hours later, when Gary's brother checked his voicemail and discovered a message from her.
"Has anyone seen Gary?"
Melissa's voice in the message showed no sign that she was aware of what had happened.
She didn't mention the fire, nor did she sound panicked or distraught. It was as if she had no idea about the tragedy that had occurred.
Gary's brother immediately called her back, and this time Melissa answered. When he told her that their house had burned down and that Gary had died in the fire,
she seemed shocked.
He urged her to contact the sheriff immediately. That afternoon, Melissa arrived at the investigation office. Just hours after being informed that her husband had died in a devastating fire, she appeared dazed, but something seemed off. She told the police that Gary wasn't even supposed to be home at the time. According to Melissa, her husband had left town for a job interview in Memphis and had told her he would be gone for 2 to 3 days. She also explained that she had taken their son to Nashville to visit family, which was where she was when she received the call from Gary's brother. But if Gary was in Memphis, how could he have died in a fire at their home? When investigators spoke with Gary's family, they were equally confused.
Melissa insisted. "Gary never goes anywhere without telling me first, and he certainly wouldn't leave town without informing his mother." So, had Gary actually left, or was he hiding something?
And if he wasn't the one who started the fire, then who did? At the West Tennessee Regional Forensic Center, the autopsy results confirmed that the body recovered from the ashes was indeed Gary Cole. But what shocked investigators even more was the cause of death. Gary had not died in the fire. He had been shot.
A single 9mm bullet was found lodged in the back of his head, a fatal execution-style shot.
Police quickly ruled out the possibility of suicide. Someone had stood behind Gary and pulled the trigger. By the afternoon of November 4, more than 24 hours after the devastating fire, dental records finally confirmed the victim's identity. But now, this case was no longer just about a tragic house fire. It was murder. The fire had destroyed nearly the entire crime scene, making it difficult for investigators to find clues. But one thing was clear: Melissa and her son were not present when the fire broke out. This immediately put them at the top of the list of people to investigate. Gary's family told police that the couple had been struggling financially. Their debts had been piling up for the past 3 years, and the situation had only gotten worse. However, one surprising detail made investigators hesitate to suspect Melissa. If Melissa truly wanted to be free of Gary, she didn't need to kill him. On August 10, just 3 months before the murder, Gary had filed for divorce. If Melissa wanted out of the marriage, all she had to do was wait. So why was Gary murdered? And more importantly, who pulled the trigger? Just like when she left her first husband, Melissa seemed ready to walk away from her son with Gary. She did not fight for custody. In fact, she agreed to give Gary full parental rights. What was even more unusual was how peaceful their separation appeared to be. Melissa continued living in the house, sleeping in the back bedroom, while the divorce process was being finalized. But then something changed. Melissa began regretting giving up custody. That's when McNairy County authorities started asking more questions, especially about the timing of the divorce. November 5. The McNairy County Sheriff summoned Melissa for further questioning, this time asking her to bring her son with her. At the station, investigators separated the two,
placing them in separate interrogation rooms. While Melissa waited, detectives focused on questioning her 9-year-old son. And then something unexpected happened. His story was completely different from his mother's. Contrary to what Melissa had told police, her son confirmed that his father was home that night. He also clearly remembered the night before the fire. On Sunday night, I was sleeping when I suddenly heard a loud bang. I woke up and ran out to see what had happened. Mom was standing there. I asked her what the noise was. She said she was wrapping Christmas presents and had accidentally dropped something. The police immediately knew this was a lie. Then, the boy continued, after that, I went back to bed. When I woke up the next morning, I saw Dad lying on the couch, completely covered by a blanket. I asked Mom what was wrong with him, and she said he was sick and told me not to touch him. Then she took me out for the whole day shopping. Mom told me to stay in the car while she bought things like a mop and cleaning supplies. The boy did not fully understand what had happened. But based on his story, investigators formed a terrifying theory. Melissa may have tried to clean up the crime scene, but her 9-year-old son had been there the entire time. After completing the interrogation with the son, the investigators entered Melissa's interrogation room. But this time, the atmosphere was completely different. It was no longer a casual conversation like 2 days before they directly confronted Melissa with her son's testimony. Faced with mounting evidence, Melissa quickly broke down. With no way out, she was forced to confess the truth. According to Melissa's confession, on the morning of November 2, she and Gary had an argument while their son was still asleep. Initially, it was not a major fight, but the situation quickly escalated to a dangerous level. In a fit of rage, Gary stormed into the bedroom and then returned with a gun. Melissa claimed that Gary forced her to sit down in the living room, placed the gun on his lap, and threatened her. According to her, Gary suspected that she was reconsidering their custody agreement and planning to take their son away. After a tense standoff, Gary decided to put the gun back in the bedroom and returned to the sofa in the living room. Eventually, he fell asleep. At that moment, Melissa made a fateful decision. She believed she was in danger, that she knew exactly what kind of person Gary was, and that she needed to protect herself. She walked into the bedroom, took Gary's gun, and then returned to the living room. As Gary slept soundly on the sofa, Melissa raised the gun and pulled the trigger. Gary Cole died instantly. Although she admitted to shooting her husband, Melissa denied setting the house on fire. She said, "I didn't set the fire." "I don't think so." This vague statement raised suspicions among investigators. She neither fully denied her involvement in the arson, nor took responsibility for it. However, the fact that Melissa had killed her husband was undeniable. As soon as the interrogation ended, the sheriff's deputies entered the room and arrested Melissa on charges of murder. The trial begins. Nearly a year after Gary Cole's body was discovered in the smoldering remains of their home, 42-year-old Melissa Cole walked into the courtroom to face charges of murdering her husband. According to the prosecution, this was neither an accident nor an act of self-defense. They argued that Melissa had planned the murder to secure custody of her son, with their divorce set to be finalized in just 1 week. That fateful night, instead of allowing the legal system to determine the outcome, she picked up a gun, aimed it at the back of Gary's head, and pulled the trigger. Prosecutors charged her with first-degree murder and opened the trial with testimony from fire investigators who uncovered multiple signs that the house had been deliberately set ablaze to cover up the crime. However, the most crucial witness was none other than their 10-year-old son, who recounted the mysterious noises that night and his mother's strange behavior afterward. In contrast to the prosecution's accusations, Melissa did not deny shooting Gary, but she insisted it was an act of self-defense. She testified that for years, Gary had physically, emotionally, and sexually abused her, controlling every aspect of her life. On the morning of November 2, 2009, she claimed that Gary threatened her with a gun, forcing her to act first to protect herself. But one critical question remained. If she was truly an abused wife, why not wait just one more week for the divorce instead of killing her husband? Was it desperation or a calculated plan? Was she a victim or a murderer? The answer would be decided in the courtroom.
October 7, 2010, the verdict inside a McNairy County courtroom in Tennessee. Melissa Cole sat in silence, awaiting her fate. The 42-year-old woman stood accused of shooting Gary Cole in the head, then setting their house on fire to conceal the crime.
Throughout the trial, Melissa never denied pulling the trigger but maintained that she had done so as a battered woman fighting for her life. However, the jury remained unconvinced. In their final verdict, they found her guilty of murder, though not first-degree murder as originally charged. Instead, they convicted her of second-degree murder, acknowledging the killing was intentional but lacked the premeditation required for a first-degree charge. Additionally, the jury found her guilty of arson and evidence tampering. In the end, the judge sentenced Melissa to 25 years in prison, 21 years for second-degree murder, 4 years for arson. As the sentence was read aloud, Gary Cole's family breathed a sigh of relief, believing justice had finally been served.
But for Melissa, was this truly punishment or just the next chapter in the tragedy of her life?
As the sun rose over the peaceful suburbs of Fairfield, New Jersey, a shocking tragedy began to unfold.
An elderly mother, who had once been the emotional cornerstone of the entire family,
was discovered lying motionless on the cold floor. At first glance, her death seemed to be a suicide, but the truth is always harsher than we expect.
When the police arrived at the scene, they had no idea that they were about to uncover a dark secret, a story of greed, betrayal, and an unforgivable crime.
And the perpetrator none other than the victim's closest relative. What truly happened on that fateful morning? Was this a meticulously planned murder, or just a moment of impulsive regret? The answer will send a chill down your spine.
On July 23, 2009, in Fairfield, New Jersey, a tragedy struck in a quiet suburban home.
Tina Loney and her husband, Christopher, seemed to be enjoying a stable and fulfilling life. They were capable of taking care of Tina's elderly mother, but everything suddenly collapsed. One fateful morning, Christopher was horrified to find his mother-in-law lying motionless on the floor, cold to the touch. At first glance, it appeared to be a suicide, but authorities were unsure.
The investigation later uncovered a shocking truth. Tina Loney, the seemingly perfect woman, was living a double life. And the most horrifying part, the victim was her own mother. On July 23, 2009, in Fairfield, New Jersey, a small, peaceful town, at 9:00 a.m., the 911 operator received a frantic call. "My wife just found her mother on the floor. She's in critical condition.
We need an ambulance right away." Within 10 minutes, the police and emergency medical team arrived at the scene. Upon arrival, they saw Christopher Loney and his wife Tina anxiously waiting at the entrance to her mother's apartment, a small space located in the basement of the house.
Tina, with red eyes and sobbing, told the police that she had found 81-year-old Marie Zotti lying motionless on the floor.
Immediately, an officer requested Tina to lead them to where Marie was. As they approached the body, one officer bent down, placing 2 fingers on her wrist to check for a pulse. And then
he slowly raised his head, confirming a chilling truth. Marie Zotti was dead. Marie Zotti was cold to the touch.
There was blood around her head, which could suggest that the 81-year-old woman had suffered an accident, possibly a heart attack, causing her to fall face first onto the floor, resulting in a bleeding wound.
But when the police gently turned her body over, they made a shocking discovery. This was not a natural death. Tightly wrapped around her neck was a necktie. A suicide? Impossible, at least according to Tina. She shakily handed the police a piece of paper that she claimed to have found near the body. It contained only one line: "Tell the kids I love them."
In the following days, investigators would face more questions than answers. And when the truth was finally revealed, it would lead them to a terrifying conclusion about Marie Zotti's death one no one could have anticipated.
Tina Zampi was born in 1967 and grew up in New Jersey in a family with a legal background. Her father was a police officer.
Her mother, Marie Zotti, was a devout woman who devoted her life to her family, husband, children, and the church. In 1992, Tina married Christopher Loney, and not long after, the young couple moved to Fairfield, settling in a peaceful, affluent neighborhood. By 1995, their life had become stable enough that they decided to invite Tina's widowed mother, Marie, to live with them.
The small apartment downstairs was the perfect place for her to be closer to her grandchildren.
A year later, Tina and Chris welcomed their first child, a son, and 2 years after that, they had a daughter. The children were very close to their grandmother, calling her Nana, and Marie always showered them with love. Not only that, but she played an important role in Tina's life, a relationship that seemed incredibly close and perfect. After years of nurturing, their family decided to take a long-awaited vacation along with friends from the neighborhood to Outer Banks. On July 22, 2009, Tina happily made the final payment for the trip, but they would never set foot in Outer Banks that summer. Less than 24 hours later, Christopher called the police to report a shocking piece of news. My wife just found her mother dead. At first, it seemed like a suicide.
But as investigators got involved, they began uncovering a dark secret, one that could completely shatter the image of this seemingly perfect family.
On the morning of July 23, 2009, Tina Loney, 41 years old, called her husband Christopher in a state of panic. Her voice was trembling as she announced, "My mom, she's committed suicide."
Hearing this, Christopher rushed out of work and drove home to Fairfield, New Jersey.
When he arrived, he found his mother-in-law, Marie Zotti, 81 years old, lying motionless on the floor of the basement apartment.
The sight left him stunned. "This can't be."
He immediately called 911 and urgently requested an ambulance. But when the police arrived at the scene, things started to get strange.
Tina insisted that it was a suicide, and even handed over a suicide note which she said she found near her mother's body. But what puzzled the police was the manner in which Marie died. A men's tie was tightly wrapped around her neck. There were no signs of hanging or external force. This does not fit the profile of a typical suicide. If Marie had truly taken her own life, why were there no signs of hanging?
The police began to suspect that this was a murder.
But who would want to kill an 81-year-old woman? A robbery? Impossible. As they searched the scene, they noticed no signs of forced entry. The front door wasn't broken, the lock was intact, and nothing was missing. So, if this wasn't a robbery, what was the real motive behind the killing? In hopes of finding a clue, the police focused on the only lead they had, Tina and Christopher Loney.
Immediately, the couple was called into the Fairfield Police Department for questioning.
In the interrogation video, Tina tried to stay calm as she recounted what happened. "I walked around the house, looked through the window, and I saw my mom lying face down on the floor.
At that point, I thought she might have fallen off the chair or something. I panicked.
I ran around the house, found an unlocked window, and climbed in."
When she entered her mother's apartment, Tina found that her mother had a broken hip.
But what was even more shocking was the tie wrapped around her neck.
At that moment, instead of calling 911 immediately, Tina called her husband first,
which made the police suspicious.
Why would she do that?
Tina explained in a confusing manner.
"I think when a loved one passes, you should notify the family first." But when asked about her mother's supposed suicide, Tina couldn't provide a clear answer.
She only recalled a strange conversation they had a few weeks before. "My mom told the kids, 'You don't need me. You won't remember me.'" The words seemed to have a negative implication, but it wasn't enough to conclude that Marie had wanted to take her own life.
Then the police asked an important question. The tie wrapped around her mother's neck.
"Whose was it?" Tina hesitated for a moment before answering. "It's my husband's." A shock
Why would an 81-year-old woman commit suicide with her son-in-law's tie? This raised further suspicions that there was something suspicious about the death of Marie Zotti. The case slowly unfolds. The mystery of the tie. Could Christopher be involved in his mother-in-law's death?
When the police interrogated Christopher, his testimony completely matched what Tina had said. He confirmed, "I don't know what happened before my wife called.
When I got there, my mother-in-law was dead, and Tina had covered her up. All I know is what my wife told me."
But the investigators weren't easily convinced. When the autopsy results were released, everything became clearer. Marie Zotti did not commit suicide. She was murdered. The examination showed that the cause of death was strangulation.
She couldn't have suffocated herself with the tie, and there were no signs of hanging.
Someone had strangled her to death. Her broken ribs indicated a struggle or violence, and the time of death was one day before Tina reported it to the police. What does that mean?
Marie Zotti had been dead since Wednesday morning, yet Tina and Christopher went about their day,
apparently unaware that a dead body was downstairs? That seemed implausible. New clues. The Loney family's secret. The police began to investigate the Loney family's life in more detail. They uncovered a shocking truth. The electricity had been cut off for months due to unpaid bills. Marie was being sued for credit card debt. The house was facing foreclosure, and the family was in a severe financial crisis. Could Marie's death be related to financial issues? Tina Loney disappears. A shocking twist on Friday afternoon, just as the police were preparing to summon Tina for a second round of questioning.
Christopher walked into the police station with a shocking announcement. "My wife is missing." What was going on? Tina had disappeared just as the police were about to question her again.
Soon, investigators would pressure Tina to face the truth, and she would reveal a shocking secret.
July 24, 2009, more than 24 hours since Tina and Christopher reported Marie Zotti's death to the police.
Initially, everything seemed like a suicide. Tina testified. She found her mother dead in the basement, and then called her husband, Christopher. He was working, and after receiving the news, he rushed home and called the police.
But the investigators had an important task. Was this a murder or truly a suicide?
The autopsy results provided the answer. Marie did not commit suicide. She was murdered.
And the suicide note no longer made sense. Before the police could interrogate Tina again, something unexpected happened. Christopher walked into the police station and reported, "My wife is missing." Tina had disappeared just when the investigation was about to make a breakthrough. What was she running from?
Soon, the investigators would follow the trail to uncover the horrifying truth behind this case. Morning of July 24, 2009, Tina Loney suddenly disappears. Christopher's testimony. The whole family had spent the night at his sister's house,
and no one slept well after the tragedy. Tina looked distressed, anxious, and almost in shock.
At 6 a.m., both of them woke up. At 6:15 a.m., Tina said she wanted to go shopping. Christopher offered to go with her, but she firmly refused. After that, Tina disappeared without a trace. Christopher, worried, called a friend and spent hours driving around town looking for her. There was no sign of Tina, and fearing she might do something reckless, Christopher decided to call the police. But the investigators had another theory. If Tina was the murderer, was Christopher hiding the truth for her? If Christopher were the killer, had he done something to Tina as well?
Interrogation room. Christopher investigated. He was questioned about the family's life, particularly the financial problems.
The police discovered that Christopher had no idea about the massive debt Tina had pushed the family into. He was shocked to learn that they were going bankrupt. Shocking statement from the police. Tina Loney is now the primary suspect in the murder of her mother.
But why would she kill her own mother?
Does the family's financial crisis have anything to do with this case? The most important thing right now is to find Tina before it's too late.
The search for Tina was unsuccessful, but an important clue emerged. Where did Tina go after she disappeared? She walked to a store, then took a bus to Atlantic City. But instead of mourning her mother's death, Tina took a shocking action. Less than 24 hours after her mother's murder, Tina appeared at the Trump Marina Casino. Security cameras recorded her playing slot machines on the boardwalk.
The police followed the trail, but when they arrived, Tina had disappeared. The trail grew cold. However, Fairfield police received an emergency 911 call. Could this be the breakthrough to uncover the truth?
Why did Tina go to the casino? Where did the family's money go? The truth was about to be revealed. On July 27, 2009, an emergency call from a citizen walking his dog helped police find Tina Loney. She was walking on Long Acres Road, and in her purse, investigators found suicide notes addressed to her husband, Christopher. The truth began to unfold. Just an hour after her arrest, Tina sat in front of the camera, ready to reveal the entire truth.
Do you want me to tell you what happened to my mother? An open-ended, ominous question from Tina.
Tina confessed to killing her mother. She recalled the heartbreaking details of how she killed Marie. The first used the tie to strangle my mother to death.
A shocking twist. Tina's confession not only involved the death of her mother, but also revealed a huge secret. She had been having an affair. Christopher had no idea about his wife's extramarital affair and was completely unaware of the murder.
The deception was exposed. Tina admitted everything, and when the confession ended, she was arrested for murder.
As Tina was taken to Essex County Jail, Christopher was still grappling with the horrifying truth about his wife and mother.
The price of betrayal and crime. Could Christopher overcome this shock?
On May 7, 2013,
Tina Loney, 45, was led into the courtroom in New Jersey to face the unimaginable crime, the brutal murder of her elderly mother,
Marie Zappi, 81. Although she had confessed to the crime from the start, Tina later retracted her confession and stated that she had been in a state of confusion when making the statement.
Investigators uncovered key details about Tina's motive. According to the prosecution, Tina killed her mother for money. Part of the reason for this was to continue her gambling behavior, which Marie could not accept.
The financial motive behind the crime. After investigation, it was revealed that Tina was deeply in debt and needed money to pay off the debts and continue gambling at casinos. Trial verdict. The jury reached a verdict at the end of the trial, and Tina Loney was found guilty of murder.
She was sentenced to 40 years in prison for killing her mother to seize her money. A shocking crime that stunned the community, as no one could believe that a daughter would be willing to kill her own mother just for money to feed her gambling habit.
This case left an indelible wound in the hearts of Marie Zappi's family and friends.
Tina Loney now faces a harsh sentence for her heinous crime.